fellow Marylanders, I am Daniel Brewster, the Democratic candidate for the United States Senate from Maryland. I want to briefly discuss with you some of the critical issues of this campaign. But before I begin, I would like you to meet my wife, Carol.
Hello.
And our two sons, my oldest, Danny.
Hello.
And Gary.
Hi.
What the future holds for my young sons and for your children will largely depend on the important national decisions which must be made in the next few years. Many of these vital decisions will be made in the Senate of the United States. The conduct of our effort in the worldwide Cold War conflict with the forces of international communism is the overriding issue facing our nation and your elected representatives. Hasty, ill-timed decisions could throw the world into a nuclear holocaust. 20 years ago, I went through some of the bloodiest fighting of the entire World War in the South Pacific. Many of you shared these experiences. I know that you join with me in praying that our sons will not have to go through the same thing. To prevent this, we must bear the tremendous expense of remaining strong. Today, we are the strongest nation in the world. We have developed an armed might that makes the cost of aggression by the Soviet Union so catastrophic to them that all-out nuclear war becomes less likely with each passing day. During the 4 years I have served in the Congress, we have taken positive steps to improve our position. The highly successful Peace Corps, the Alliance for Progress, an expanded Food for Peace program, the establishment of the United States Disarmament Agency, continued support of the United Nations, and the President's recently enacted liberal trade bill have tremendously strengthened our hand. But I do not want to give you the impression that we have no problems to face today and in the future. As a member of the House Armed Services Committee, I recently sat in on secret detailed briefings on our current military situation, with particular emphasis on the recent developments in Cuba. We listened to Secretary of Defense McNamara, Secretary of State Russ, and top officials of the CIA present to us a realistic and sobering appraisal of our strengths and our weaknesses. We heard an equally realistic analysis of the enemy's capabilities and his probable intentions. There can be no denying that the present situation is serious. It is quite serious and may become even more explosive in the weeks to come. This makes it even more imperative that we remain calm and act deliberately. If we stand up now, if we weather this challenge, if we convince the Soviets of our steadfastness, peace with pride will be our reward. If we falter, the avalanche will begin. Every word, every deed, every action we take must be aimed at one objective: to convince the Soviet Union that we will not yield 1 inch to communism. We must answer every threat of force with calmness, but with the determined show of counter-force. We must convince Mr. Khrushchev and his cohorts that America is united and strong. But above everything else, show that we are ready to once again demonstrate that courage that made America great. If I am privileged to serve you in the Senate of the United States, I pledge my full time. My every effort will be devoted to giving you vigorous, imaginative, and independent representation in Washington. Thank you, my friends, for listening. My fellow Marylanders, I am Daniel Brewster, the Democratic candidate for the United States Senate from Maryland. I want to briefly discuss with you some of the critical issues of our times. Before I begin, however, I would like you to meet my family. Here with me is my wife, Carol.
How do you do?
And our two boys, Danny.
Hello.
And Gary.
Hi.
What the future holds for my young sons and for your children will largely depend on the important national decisions which must be made in the next few years. Many of these vital decisions will be made in the Senate of the United States. The conduct of our effort in the worldwide Cold War conflict with the forces of international communism is the overriding issue facing our nation and the Congress. Its shadow is cast over all of our deliberations, whether they concern foreign or domestic policy. The cost of maintaining freedom is tremendous. Well over 50% of our budget is devoted to direct military expenditures. The necessity for spending over 50 cents out of each tax dollar for defense makes it imperative that Congress take a long, hard look at all domestic spending proposals, because the battle against inflation is one of the vital aspects of our total Cold War effort. There are many things the government should do. There are equally many other things that it should not do. We must prevent unnecessary government interference in certain areas of our economic life. One way we can affect substantial economy is to drastically curtail our federal foreign programs. During my 4 years in Congress, I have consistently opposed these patchwork programs as costly, unrealistic, and unworkable. I advocate a system of gradually reduced supports until finally these supports would end and the prices which the housewife pays in the market would be established by the law of supply and demand. The recent rise in the number of jobless workers in Maryland is of serious concern to all of us. Unfair or unwise allocation of defense contracts may partly be responsible for this situation. Our Maryland industries have the modern plant facilities, the industrial know-how, and the highly skilled workers to compete for a fair share of this defense work. I pledge to fight to see that Maryland receives its just share of this defense work. The realistic conservation of our natural resources is vital to the growth and security of our society. Control of water pollution has become the number one resource problem confronting the United States. We must act on this now. Tomorrow will be too late. The problem is definitely national in scope, and the cooperation of federal, state, and local governments is required if we are to have an adequate supply of clean, fresh water for future generations of Americans. When the youngest of my sons has grown to manhood, the world in which he lives will be shaped by what we do today. If I am privileged to serve you in the United States Senate, I pledge to continue the fight against the obstructionists and the stand patters, those who would deny adequate medical care to our aged citizens, who would deny fair representation for our nation's 150 million city dwellers, and who would deny more and better schools and more and better teachers for our children. My friends, thank you very much for listening.